Welcome to Macon Memories. This is Lynda Wright at Randolph-Macon College. Today is May the 18th, 2010, and I'm here with Mr. Hopkins and Mr. Offenbacker.
This is Robert Offenbacker. I taught mathematics at Randolph-Macon, and my friend Bob Hopkins will be heard shortly.
And I'm Bob Hopkins. I was registrar at Randolph-Macon. I came in July of 1968.
Okay, thank you. We'll start with you, Mr. Hopkins. Tell us more about how and when you came to Randolph-Macon.
Actually, it was sort of by accident. I was hired by Luther Wright, who was the president at that time, and I had been business manager at Chatham Hall, a girls' prep school. And Lola and I got a little tired of living on a girls' campus and never getting away. And I came really to be interviewed to be in the treasurer's office. But in the meantime, they had already hired Don Reed, who came after I did. But Luther said, well, we do have another position here that has opened up with the departure of Bill Robertson, who is both Dean of Admissions and Registrar, to be Registrar and to help in the admissions office. So that's how I came to be in this position, how I came to Randolph-Macon.
Well, I came to Randolph-Macon in the fall of 1958. And I was, I suppose, recruited by Moreland, though I had learned a little bit about Randolph-Macon from two graduate students at UVA that I got to know very well who were alumni of Randolph-Macon, namely Pat Clay and John Miller. And they had sort of clued me in. I didn't know where Randolph-Macon was at the time, but I mean, I'd heard about it. And I was contacted by Dr. Moreland, who was then president, and I accepted a position, and I've been here ever since.
And he came as a full professor.
That was unusual?
Well, probably so. Not only that, I think even more unusual, I came with tenure. Of course, tenure in those days was usually conferred after about 3 years. I don't remember precisely, but I think it's about 3 years. It was not the 7-year deal that we have now. But I believe my initial appointment conferred both the level of professor and tenure. And I can't say anything more about it than that because I didn't have anything, access to Moreland's records.
Speaks highly of you. Who were some of your early mentors and role models when you came? Anyone you worked closely with?
Are you referring to here or elsewhere?
Here, once you got here, who was some either faculty administrators that you got to know well?
Well, in my case, it was obviously Bill Blinko, who was an outstanding person. And there was T. McKnighter Simpson, who, though retired, was still active in the math department. And I knew Bruce English, whom I had met at UVA also, who was an alumnus of Randolph-Macon, who came back to Randolph-Macon to head the physics department. And then there was a man who was not attached to Randolph-Macon, but I may have been an alumnus of Randolph-Macon, but whom I had known since his days at Randolph-Macon Women's College, Herbert Lipscomb. He had a brother who was chairman of the board here, Willis Lipscomb. But Herbert Lipscomb was a very well-known teacher of Latin at Randolph-Macon Women's College and retired in what I suppose was his home, namely Ashland, and there were a lot. But soon I got to know a lot of people, and all of them, or almost all of them, I was very, very fond of.
How about
you? There were a number of people, obviously. Bob, who was a mentor. Ed Cox and I he moved into admissions when Bill Robinson went to the Medical College of Virginia. And I took over. Ed was registrar for about 2 years. And I took over his job, but I also worked for 2 years, both in admissions and as registrar, along with Matt Taylor, whom Ed had hired as a road runner. And 3 of us did this for about, 3 or 4 years. And then we more or less became separated. And I became very close to faculty, George Oliver, Jim Scanlon, Bob Offenbacker, who never hesitated to tell me if I was what I should do or if I was wrong. He spoke of Dr. Lipscomb. My wife, Lola, had gone to Randolph-Macon Women's College, and she had been taught by Dr. Lipscomb. And she had many friends through her family here. And we liked Ashland, and since retiring, we've stayed here.
So you came in 1968, and you said you worked in admissions for 2 or 3 years. So that must have been right around the time leading up to going coeducational. So would you like to, both of you, speak about that for a bit?
We went, how actually with the admission work, I was doing road running to high schools and so forth. Ed and I were splitting it, and then Matt did. We went co-ed in, 72, I think.
72 or 71.
I think
I'm
it was
not quite
71.
Fall of 71.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And before that, of course, it was an all-male school. And we were preparing for all of the different things that might occur with coeducation. It was a very small first class. I think there were only 30 some odd people in that first class. And most of these were transfers who had transferred in.
Now you're
For
referring
that
to women,
year,
aren't
for
you?
women.
Yes, because there were more than
And-
30 in the whole class.
Oh, yeah. But the first class that really graduated were transfers. And the ones that came as freshmen, of course, if they stayed, finished 4 years later. It was pretty much during that time, a number of the women would come for 2 years and then go to MCV for nursing, or they would go into other programs and transferred out after 2 years. So it took a while for a class to develop that stayed 4 years here.
Well, I was somewhat apprehensive of going co-ed, not because I had any objection to the women, but I thought that the folk story was that women were less likely to major in math, and so I thought we would experience a decline. But I think there were a couple of factors that I hadn't really considered, and one of them was people like Ron Moore, who was chairman of the math department for quite some time, Austin Bishop, and others were exceedingly good teachers, and I think that was one of the reasons that students, male or female, were attracted. And the long and the short of it was that there was no diminution in our enrollment that I could detect, and girls seemed to major in mathematics with the same frequency as did boys. And in fact, perhaps a little better. I don't have data on this, but so there was no interruption as far as I could see. And it was very nice to have them. And I remember one of the girls that came, who was also a student of Burnell Panel, and he and I were sort of thrilled with her work, and she was one of the first.
Math major.
No, well, one of them was a
yeah.
math major that came in the earliest, but that one that I was thinking about, whose name slips me, I don't think she was a major in math. I think she majored in philosophy, but I'm not sure.
and one of the real helps that I always could turn to was Bill Robertson, who is a close personal friend who has since died. But if I wanted to know anything, I called Bill. He was an alumnus as well, and had done both jobs, and he knew all of the history of things that had gone on. He was a nephew of Dr. Gwillette Simpson, and kin to the Simpsons, and he knew everything and could tell you about everything. And he trained me over the phone in his house, more or less, along with this one.
Well, you know, one thing that I think is, you mentioned the connection to the Simpsons. One of the assets of Ronald Macon that was very obvious to me when I first came was the towering intellect of and respect for T. McNider Simpson, who had been dean. There were some who were not enthralled by him, I guess, among the faculty, but I thought he was one of the most outstanding persons I've met since, well, anywhere. And I think the Simpsons played a big role at that stage.
Can you talk a little bit about the changes and growth in the administration during that period, or your period of, while you were here?
Well, there weren't that many of us, to tell you the truth. I ran.
There are now.
Well, compared now to when I was here, I was it. I had a Brenda Martin, who was the assistant, and she and I were it in the, data processing was not as in. We were gradually getting into it. I had a secretary, assistant, Mrs. Herholzer, who
She was remarkable.
a remarkable
I liked
woman.
her.
She was a widow of an Army colonel who had settled here, and she was sort of held the place together, so to speak. And that was it. I mean, I've discovered that there was a great deal of work that had to be done with the records and so forth. It had, with the expansion particularly that was coming. One of the things that came along is that I was finally able to get all of the records on tape, which involved getting past records which were kept by hand or handwritten, when even Marshall McNeil, who was treasurer before Don Reed came, had been registrar, and he had kept records in that beautiful handwriting that he wrote. That doesn't happen anymore now.
He was a remarkable man, Marshall McNeil. I got to know him very well, and Burnell Panel and I were very close friends, and Marshall was apparently of long standing a friend of Burnell. They were both Valley boys. They came from across over in the Valley of Virginia, and I sort of got to know them, maybe because I too am a Valley person. And so anyway, yes, Marshall McNeil was outstanding in his work, and he taught mathematics, by the way, when he first came here.
Can you talk a little bit more about the transition as you had to get the records onto tape? Did you have card punch, or what sort of mechanism did you use?
It was put on microfilm.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah, which was all you had at that particular time. Yeah, I had been pushing for an assistant, and I really needed one. It was, Lewis said I lived over here practically, but finally was able to get an assistant who was Marilyn Gibbs, who succeeded me as registrar, and she has since retired. And I must say I'm not as I mean, I know the present registrar, but only, we know each other, but there's no working contact with them.
Would you like to talk a little bit about activities in college governance committees that you served on? I know you were elected to committees and you were ex officio, I presume.
Well, committees, that was in, I think, the Luther White years that they became elected. Committees initially were appointed. I guess the first committee I was on was one created by Moreland to let some of us newer people vent our feelings, and can't remember what it was named. George Oliver could probably tell you. Then when Bill Blinko decided to take a leave of absence for a year, he recommended to Moreland that I be made chairman of the what was called the
Credits Committee.
Credits Committee. They call it Credits Committee. And that was my first, and then over the time I served on almost all the committees that have been the curriculum. I served on the committee on faculty. I chaired for a long time the what is called the Admissions and Credits Committee. I gave it a name that
it has another name.
Yes, Luther White did not particularly like my sounding of the abbreviations. The letters in it were ACASS, and I called it ACAS. And Luther White never did think that was quite a seemly name. But anyway, it stuck. I think it probably is still called that. Anyway, I was chairman of also the executive committee of the faculty for a while. I guess I had a fair amount of committee exposure.
He's being very mild. He did everything.
And I was honored by being elected, and I occasionally was not elected. And it was fun. I enjoyed it, and I took it rather seriously. And I think in part, my attachment to and respect for Bob Hopkins came about because of my work on committees. Because in almost all these cases, well, certainly on credits and also academic status and all that, the relationship with the registrar's office was integral. And I therefore got to know Bob and rely upon him to a great extent.
Well, my committee experience, as Bob said, mostly was I don't know what it's called, secretary, but ex officio for the ACAS committee. And probably I was probably the first non-faculty member who was elected to serve on the curriculum committee. And I also worked with that for the term that I was elected. But most of mine was on the ACAS committee. Now, Bob here goes back to committees before my time. He was the young Turk of the faculty when he came. And the curmudgeon that he is, he had a reputation among the older faculty as that young whippersnapper.
We'll talk about some of the changes that occurred in the curriculum or in the credits, especially requirements for graduation. How did things evolve in that area?
Well, the big thing that came shortly after I came was the change in the curriculum to what was called the 414 plan of curriculum throughout the country for a while. It is not as much in favor. We're probably one of the few schools still left on it, and it has been. We even got to the point where we went to a 12-12-4, having the short term in May, so that the 2 semesters weren't broken apart as much. That was pretty much defeated and I don't mean this derogatorily, but by the athletic department because it interfered with spring playoffs and so forth. And it got moved back to January. And today is just commonly called J-term. And that was the major change. It was Gene Long, who was in the philosophy department, was chairman of that committee.
Gene Long and several others. Gene is also a really close friend of mine. We had been agitating since I came in '58, and before that, I think George Oliver might confirm. We were getting a little tired of the curriculum that had been adopted in 1946, I believe, right after the war. And a committee was formed by Moreland, headed by Gene Long, that came in with a recommendation, as Bob says, for a new curriculum and particularly a new calendar. And as much as I admire and respect Gene Long, I was never convinced ahead of time that the January term would be a success academically. What I didn't realize was that it became an instant favorite with both faculty and students, at making it, almost impossible to alter. But I was never thrilled, and I'm still not thrilled with the January term as a vehicle, but that's the way it is.
Any other curriculum issues of significance?
Well, one thing that was, they had several. One of them was they had in the 46 curriculum, what was called a books program. And it may have been a very noble idea, but its nobility shrank over time, and it became just a farce, I thought. And that was something that was done away with in '68. We also had a mandatory senior project that was something like a thesis in the senior year. And here again, it was very popular. Many schools had it. As I recall it, Princeton had it at that particular time, and probably still does. I never felt that it was as good as it could be, and also I think the type of student we receive or get is very important in the type of curriculum that we have. And so gradually the senior project was made more or less optional. And I think today, well, I can't say for today because I've been here so long, but while I was teaching, there was still the option of students doing a semi-research project, but it was not required.
It still holds.
Well, I'm glad it. Yeah, right.
Can you tell me a little bit about the books program from the 46 curriculum?
Well, there were certain books that were assigned to be read by everybody in the first 2 years. And then they were given an exam on these. What troubled me a great deal, I was a part, along with Dick Grove, I never shall forget, Man's Emerging Mind was the book, and they were supposed to do it. And we came up with, by the way, we came up with the exam that the students were supposed to pass, and it was presented to the books committee, and they approved the book, or at least if they had read it, they had paid a little attention to it. Ways were found to get them through, and it was, in my opinion, a farce. And maybe one of the reasons I was so endeared to the faculty was I called it a farce. And so, anyway, it was done away. It didn't have a noble burial.
Just curious. I'm just very interested in this program, but did all the students of all 4 years read the same book each year, or was it sort of all the freshmen read a book, or was it the program only for seniors, or how did it? Just curious.
Well, I can't remember the details exactly, but it was by year. And the first 2 years, it was limited to, I think, 3 or 4 books. I don't recall precisely whether they read the same thing, freshman and sophomore or not. But anyway, and the book was selected, I suppose, by the books committee. That's why I expect it was called that. And they were good books. I'm not saying they weren't good books. I just think that the program, again, it never, during the time I was here, then it never seemed to enjoy respect among the students, certainly, and I didn't think it was very good. But now, what it was like in 46, you need to talk to somebody who was here in 46, because I can't really say. I mean, so many things, when they start out well, and then for whatever reason they deteriorate. So I can't say whether this is the case with the books program. I came in sort of at the end of it, and it was, as I say, not a particularly noble aspect.
Thank you. I was just curious because that's a very popular program on college campuses today, is what they call the one book read. Mm-hmm. It's very popular in civic organizations and on college campuses to get everyone to read the same book as a point of contact. So I was just curious how it worked. Tell me what you see as the watershed events in the college during the years that you were here. Maybe there might be 2 or 3.
I'm sort of at a loss, I suppose, to name one, but I suppose in the mid-'70s we were having a lot of trouble financially. We were having troubles because of the oil embargo, I believe, which occurred. I remember Don Reed's reporting to the faculty that our cost of buying heating oil had gone up so dramatically and so forth in that period. I think that had may have been one of the pivotal areas, but so much is not within the purview of the faculty, and I'm not sure that if I were, say, a trustee and had served as many years as I have served as a faculty member, I might have a different answer, because I didn't get to see everything that was going on, and these things that change often have origins that may not be just in the academic side of the program.
I can't think of anything particular. I mean, obviously the big change was coeducation, which I've always thought if we had not done it, I don't know that Randolph-Macon would be here today if we hadn't gone co-ed. The market of male applicants had shrunk so.
Figures just didn't point to success if we continued to enlist only male students. So that could be a pivotal thing. I was thinking of in slightly different terms when I answered my way. Mm-hmm. But I think both, in a sense, are important. But I would say coeducation was certainly a very important change.
And they're related.
Well, yeah.
They're certainly related issues. Anything else that you think helped Randolph-Macon turn the corner from its struggles in the 70s?
Well, I think obviously when Liddell Payne came, uh, he had a big influence on the college, and I think things began to get better. Uh, I think there were I don't know enough of the whole scheme to say more. As I say, Bob has maybe more insight into the administrative point of view. Uh, my career here was almost altogether in the faculty, and therefore I don't know that there was any specific thing in the faculty that came along.
Well, originally when I came, I can remember Luther White had every Monday morning a session with almost everybody up in the
Mullen Room?
Mullen Room
Not faculty.
of the administration.
Oh, okay, that's what
And
I said.
you had to report what was going on and so forth, etc. A lot of us thought the sooner we get rid of this, the better, which happened. I mean, it just ended up with only about the four top, I mean, the dean and treasurer, and he could report what was going on. It was a rather, I don't want to say a wasted morning, but it took forever every week, and it wasn't really necessary, but it got down to where all of us didn't have to go every time.
A couple of things I did want to ask you. I did want you to know. I want to know if there were any particular Dr. Moreland stories that you could share. Where we love to capture those because there aren't as many people around who were hired under Dr. Moreland. So anything that you have that sort of captures Dr. Moreland, I would be interested in.
Well, one of the things that I think was about
You mean
Dr. Moreland.
anecdotes?
Well, I want to say that when I first came here, both Dr. Moreland and his wife were extremely kind to me. I was living over in a house that now does not exist on the campus, and Ms. Moreland would bring me hot rolls that she had made, and I would be invited to Sunday night supper at the Morelands and so on. So the Morelands were very, 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 very kind to me, and I suspect they were to many others. I can't say that. Moreland had ways of saying things sometimes that were predictable. He was, I think, a psychologist or something of that sort, and he really exemplified that. One of the things that I do remember about him was that when he was giving a report to the faculty, he invariably would give us figures down to the penny. How many people really were convinced that that was the number? I can't say, but that was one of his. In some ways, he was very kind. I remember an incident that I was active in my early years with fraternities at Macon. I was advisor to Kappa Sig, but I was involved because they were all right together there. And a young man got into trouble, and Moreland expelled him. And I remember having talked to Moreland about him. The young man was really a very fine young man, and not only I, but a faculty member who is no longer at Macon and is also no longer living, Lou Diana. Lou and I went and talked to Moreland a great deal. Anyway, the long and the short of it was that Moreland felt that it was important to get rid of the student because he had infringed what, from Moreland's point of view, was a very important thing. He and the offense was that he and his girlfriend had gone up to his room, which was on the second floor. That was not allowed in those days. And I think they'd both had too much to drink and went to sleep. They were nothing was ever alleged more serious than that, but it was serious enough in Moreland's eyes. But the thing of it was that Moreland got on the phone and talked to the president of another college and got him enrolled the following semester in that college. So on the one hand, he enforced the rule, which I had urged him not to do, and so had Lou Diana. But also, he apparently took our recommendation seriously enough to help him out. So there are many stories of Moreland. He's no longer living, and I don't think he should have to put up with my versions of.
There was always he started his speeches. I have 3 points.
Oh yes, he always had 3 points. Always had 3
Did he always
points.
have 3 points?
Yes, yes. Oh, and he
Oh
was.
yes.
Well, another thing that was interesting, fascinated me because while I'm not a specialist in it, I'm interested in parliamentary procedure. And Moreland made up rules in a parliamentary procedure that was absolutely absurd. And one of them, when he was disaffected because he didn't like what somebody was saying, a biology professor at that particular time, he made up the rule that since he had made a speech, he couldn't offer a motion. That was a way to keep him from. So there were. To put it this way, I think some people were very, very irritated by these foibles, if that's the right word, of Moreland. On the other hand, I think he probably, after all, the college, I have been told, would have, just as it was, might have gone down if it didn't go co-ed, if it didn't get some sort of, I think it was Navy program here, I was not here, back during World War II, it would have sunk, because I know people like Bill Malenko had to, for example, resign and went, I think, to teach at the University of Tennessee or something like that. So the Moreland came and guided the college through an extremely difficult period during World War II. I can't talk details, I wasn't even here. But so he had a long and interesting career. He had a lot of little foibles, and some people were annoyed by those foibles, and I guess that's all I can say.
Actually, after Dr. Moreland retired, he lived across the street from where Lou and I live, and he always wanted to say, "I like to see all your lights lit up in white for Christmas and so forth." And we were the youngest people in that neighborhood of a bunch of very elderly people, and we sort of looked after Dr. Moreland. And went over one day, and the newspapers hadn't been picked up, and there was no sign. And really, we were quite worried about it. And finally, got somebody, and we got what would happen to him, because it had a second story with a pretty bad stairs in it, and his bedroom was upstairs, and we all kind of watched out for him in that house.
Thank you. I wondered if you might speak about the transition the college took from having a traditional honor code to something more similar to what we have today. And I'm not exactly sure of even the time frame, but if you have any memories about that.
Well, I don't have very many memories. I went to UVA as an undergraduate and also in graduate school. I thought UVA had a very fine honor system. I personally subscribed to that. I was pleased when I came to Macon to see that they too had an honor system. And I think it worked pretty well, at least during the first years here. Now, there were problems that developed in the honor system, and they tried to modify it. The questions of single sanction was one of them, and others. And I think we went through a phase. I'm really not sure, but I think we went through a phase of a kind of what was not the traditional honor system, but it was still called an honor system. And then I think, as you said a moment ago, it became something like the academic integrity system. And I don't know much about it. I had no part in it, none.
And no, I remember nothing about that.
Let's see. Thank you. I don't want to keep you too long, but just a few final thoughts we might summarize. If you might reflect on your most satisfying experiences at Randolph-Macon, or sum up your years here.
Actually, I think probably the enjoyable part was the students. I was an advisor to a number of students, also was partial advisor to one of the fraternities. While I enjoyed the nitty-gritty maybe of the work, it was the pleasure of working with the students and seeing them mature and so forth. And since I've heard from a number of them that out of the blue I'll get an email from one of them every now and then, and that was the enjoyable part. And I guess the thing I was most flattered by was because it usually was just faculty when I was given the Thomas Nelson Page Award, in which Bob Offenbacker also received.
I think you got that award back-to-back years.
Maybe, I'm not sure.
91 and, let's see,
Oh, you've done your homework.
90 and 91. Which is a great honor.
Well, yes, I like Bob, I enjoyed the students. That was certainly, I went into teaching because I enjoyed students. I taught a bit at UVA when I was a graduate student, you know, just that. Then when I was in the Navy, I taught at George Washington University for a while in the night school because it was possible. And then, of course, I came here. I also have, I think one of the important things was the relationship with other members of the Randolph-Macon family, persons like Bob, the president, and the faculty members, many of whom I consider to be close and dear friends. Persons like James Scanlon, for example, and George Oliver, and of course Ron Moore and Bruce Torrance, and you could go on and on and on. John Rabun. I consider myself lucky to have been able to serve with them.
There are a lot of funny anecdotes that come up. One of the thing that I'll never forget, during the first few years when I was registrar, the registrar did not participate in commencement, and the dean of the college, Dr. Mabry, gave out the diplomas. In those days, the diplomas also were signed by all of the faculty members, as well as the board chairman and president and so forth. And Dean Mabry would have them all up there, and he'd peel off the diploma as the person came up, and it took forever to go through all of these. So I came up with the idea. I got a hold of some of my cohorts elsewhere and found where I could get these tubes that we could roll the diplomas in. And about that time, Luther decided that I should be up there to hand them to him to give, to speed it up, mainly was what we were trying to do. And that worked all right until suddenly one year discovered we didn't have enough tubes. So I called one of my friends at Richmond or somewhere and got some more tubes up. Well, the trouble was these tubes didn't quite fit in the racks. And right in the middle of it, all of them just went everywhere, practically. One of life's embarrassing moments, but we got through it all right, but that didn't happen again.
Any other special commencement or memories, any other thing you'd like to share?
Oh, I remember certain speakers. I remember when George Bush came, when he was head of the CIA as a commencement speaker. And we've had some, well, Tom Wolfe, who was a classmate of mine at Washington Lee from Richmond, was speaker. And let me see, we had some other, Roger Mudd, who was another classmate of mine, was a year ahead of me. And we have had some really outstanding speakers, and then we've had some that were a little long-winded. But
Well, I can remember something on the other side. You were talking about Alec Mabry. I think I'm correct in saying that we conferred a degree while standing in line. Something had happened, and a student was, shall we say, hanging by a thread, and Dr. Mabry came along and got consent from those of the faculty standing in line for commencement to it. Yeah, so that was probably the. I may have that a little bit wrong, but I think that's essentially correct. I thought that was an example of last-minute preparation.
On not only the students' part. Oh, very interesting. Well, any final thoughts or reflections?
Well, I'll say that in my case, I would hope that the college continues to do well. I hope that I don't mean just simply in terms of financial success. I think that I don't know very many of the newer faculty, but if we are getting faculty that are of the type that I remember, I think the college is in good position.
Yeah, there are very few left that were here when I was, although they've retired. I can think of some of the ones that came just as I was about to go, but I don't know many of the new faculty at all. There were in the old days, and Bob can testify, everybody lived in Ashland. The housing, what the faculty did, there was much more congeniality in the sense of nowadays they're scattered everywhere, and it's the change of the times. It's people, you just don't have that group. You don't have the
Campus circle?
Campus circle, which really Mrs. Moreland founded, and it was more or less because she died before he did, and they did a lot of the preparation, the teas, the receptions, the food, the flowers, and so forth, etc. But it had broken up, and they had a bridge club, they had a coffee club, they had a book club, and everybody was expected to be in one of those. Well, that kind of went by the wayside, and that campus circle disappeared when the Paynes came, because it was Gene had took over many of the duties of what the campus circle had done, and people were not living here. They lived in Richmond, they lived up in the county or away. They came and taught their classes and went home. You never saw them again. But I think the campus circle served its purpose for the time it was in existence, but I don't think anybody was sorry to see it go.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your memories with us today and making memories.